Sometimes the greatest storms do not arrive to destroy a life. They arrive to lead two strangers toward the truth they never knew they were searching for. The rain hammered against the roof of Nathan Brooks's small log cabin with such relentless force that even the towering pine trees outside seemed to bend beneath the weight of the wind. It was nearly 4:30 in the morning in the mountains of western Montana, and the world beyond the frosted windows had disappeared beneath sheets of cold rain and rolling fog. Nathan quietly secured another log inside the cast-iron stove before checking on his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, who slept peacefully beneath a handmade quilt he had sewn together from old fabric after her mother passed away years earlier. The cabin was modest, warmed more by love than by money, filled with handcrafted wooden furniture Nathan had built himself over the years. His old pickup truck rested outside beneath the storm, its faded paint and worn tires reflecting a life built through honest work instead of easy fortune. Nathan had planned to leave before sunrise to repair a neighbor's damaged barn roof, but the weather made that impossible. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and stood quietly near the window, watching lightning briefly illuminate the forest before darkness swallowed everything once more. Then came 3 slow knocks against the front door. They were calm, deliberate, almost respectful. Nathan frowned slightly. No one drove these mountain roads during storms like this unless they had no other choice. He opened the door without hesitation. Standing beneath the porch light was a woman whose elegant navy coat was soaked by the relentless rain. Long blonde hair clung to her shoulders, and despite the storm, her posture remained remarkably composed. In one hand, she held a worn brass key attached to a faded leather tag. In the other rested a waterproof envelope protected beneath her coat. Her blue eyes revealed exhaustion, urgency, and something deeper that looked remarkably close to fear, though she struggled to hide it. Nathan stepped aside immediately. "Please come inside before you freeze." She entered quietly, removing her wet gloves while carefully protecting the envelope from the rain. Warm air from the stove slowly replaced the chill that surrounded her. Nathan handed her a clean towel without asking who she was or why she had come. She accepted it with visible gratitude before looking around the simple cabin. Every shelf, chair, table, and picture frame had clearly been built by the same careful hands. "You did not ask my name," she said softly. Nathan smiled gently while placing another piece of firewood into the stove. People usually have a reason for knocking on a stranger's door before sunrise during a storm. Names can wait until they are warm. For the first time that morning, the woman allowed herself a faint smile. "My name is Victoria Hayes." Nathan nodded politely, showing no sign that the name meant anything unusual to him. She seemed surprised by his lack of reaction. Across the country, millions recognized the Hayes family as the founders of one of America's largest manufacturing companies. Yet the man standing before her simply offered another cup of hot coffee, as though she were any ordinary traveler caught in bad weather. Victoria slowly placed the old brass key on the wooden table between them. The metal was worn smooth by generations of careful hands. She then laid the waterproof envelope beside it without opening either item. After taking a slow breath, she finally spoke the words that had carried her through the storm. "My grandfather left instructions that were never supposed to be opened until after his passing. Yesterday, his attorney delivered them to me. The letter did not tell me to call my board of directors. It did not tell me to contact my family. It gave me one address deep in these mountains, one brass key, and one sentence that has not left my mind since I read it." She looked directly into Nathan's eyes. "Find Nathan Brooks before sunrise. Trust him before you trust anyone else. If you fail, our family's greatest legacy will disappear forever." The cabin remained wonderfully quiet except for the gentle crackling of firewood inside the cast iron stove and the steady rhythm of rain striking the windows. Nathan carefully placed 2 steaming mugs of fresh coffee onto the wooden table before sitting across for Victoria. The old brass key rested between them, its worn surface reflecting the soft orange glow from the fire. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, reminding them that sunrise was still hidden behind thick storm clouds. Victoria finally reached for the waterproof envelope with slow, careful hands, almost as though she feared opening it would change everything forever. She gently broke the old wax seal that carried the Hayes family crest. Inside rested a single folded letter written on thick cream-colored paper in elegant handwriting that had faded slightly with age. Nathan quietly watched without interrupting. Victoria unfolded the pages and began reading aloud. To my granddaughter Victoria, if these words have reached you, then my time has already passed, and the responsibility I protected for many years now belongs to you. Before the first light touches the mountains, you must travel to the abandoned Black Creek train station. Do not go alone. Find Nathan Brooks. Follow his judgment before your own. Trust his character before you trust your fear. The future of our family's greatest legacy depends upon both of you arriving together. Victoria lowered the letter, still struggling to understand why a man she had never met was suddenly at the center of her grandfather's final wishes. Nathan quietly accepted the pages when she handed them across the table. He read every line slowly before turning the paper over. His eyes paused for a moment. Near the bottom corner, someone had drawn a small sketch of an old railroad lantern beside a single handwritten sentence. The first door opens only for those who arrive with nothing to prove. Nathan studied the drawing carefully. Black Creek Station has been abandoned for almost 40 years, he said thoughtfully. Very few people even remember it is still there. Victoria looked surprised. You know the place? Nathan nodded gently. My father used to take me there when I was a little boy. He always said forgotten places usually protect forgotten promises. Before either of them could continue, soft footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Emma quietly appeared from the hallway, wearing warm pajamas and carrying her favorite stuffed rabbit beneath one arm. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes before looking curiously toward the unfamiliar visitor. Nathan smiled warmly. Good morning, sweetheart. I'm sorry the storm woke you. Emma glanced toward Victoria before offering an innocent smile that immediately eased the tension inside the room. Victoria smiled back, grateful for the unexpected kindness. Nathan introduced them simply, never mentioning wealth, business, or the mysterious letter. Emma politely wished Victoria good morning before noticing the unusual brass key resting on the table. That looks very old, she whispered. Victoria nodded softly. It belonged to my grandfather. Emma looked at the key for another moment before saying something neither adult expected. Grandpa always said old keys are not made to unlock treasure. They unlock stories. Nathan looked quietly toward his daughter with gentle surprise, because those exact words had once been spoken by his own late father many years earlier. He had never repeated them to Emma. Victoria noticed the expression on Nathan's face immediately. What is it? She asked softly. Nathan slowly folded the letter and slipped it back inside the envelope. Nothing, he answered after a thoughtful pause. It is just strange when memories begin finding you before sunrise. He stood and walked toward a small wooden cabinet near the front door. From the top shelf, he removed an old folded county map that had not been opened in years. Carefully spreading it across the table, he traced a narrow mountain road with his finger until it reached an isolated clearing deep inside the forest. A faded circle surrounded the words Black Creek Station. Outside, the rain finally began to soften, and somewhere beyond the clouds the first hint of morning slowly approached, carrying with it the feeling that whatever waited inside the forgotten station had already been waiting for them far longer than either of them could possibly imagine. Less than 15 minutes later, the storm had softened into a steady rain as Nathan's old pickup truck followed the narrow mountain road, winding through towering pine forests toward the forgotten Black Creek Station. The windshield wipers moved back and forth with a slow rhythm, while patches of fog drifted across the road ahead. Victoria sat quietly in the passenger seat, the brass key and her grandfather's letter resting carefully inside the waterproof envelope on her lap. She had expected a difficult journey, but she had not expected the strange sense of calm that came from riding beside a man who seemed completely untouched by the importance of her family name. Nathan kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, his attention focused on the muddy road instead of the expensive sedan that had been left behind at his cabin. Before leaving, he had insisted they use the pickup because he knew these mountain trails better than anyone. Victoria glanced toward him several times before finally asking the question that had been growing in her mind since sunrise. "Do you truly not know who I am?" Nathan smiled faintly without taking his eyes off the road. "I know your name because you introduced yourself. Everything else can wait until it becomes important." Victoria looked out through the rain-covered window. "Most people recognize my family immediately." Nathan nodded gently. "That probably makes life more complicated than peaceful." She could not help smiling. Very few people had ever answered her that way. Most became nervous, eager to impress her, or immediately began asking for opportunities, introductions, or financial help. Nathan had done none of those things. He had simply offered coffee, warmth, and directions. After another mile of quiet driving, Victoria spoke again. "Are you never curious?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "Curiosity about people is healthy. Curiosity about what they own usually is not." The words lingered in the truck long after he finished speaking. Outside, the forest gradually opened into a wide clearing where rusted railroad tracks disappeared beneath years of grass and wildflowers. Black Creek Station slowly emerged from the mist ahead. The old wooden building leaned slightly with age, its faded paint weathered by decades of Montana winters. Broken windows reflected the pale morning light while vines climbed across sections of the abandoned platform. Nathan parked beside the station and stepped out first, carefully helping Victoria across a large puddle before they approached the entrance together. The air smelled of wet pine, old timber, and rain-soaked earth. Every sound seemed unusually clear now that the storm had nearly passed. Victoria looked around the empty station with growing uncertainty. "It feels as though time simply stopped here." Nathan quietly ran his hand across one of the weathered wooden beams. "Places do not forget. People usually do." They slowly entered the abandoned waiting room where dust-covered cracked wooden benches and an old ticket counter still stood beneath a faded station clock frozen at 7:23. Sunlight slipped through broken windows, revealing tiny particles floating silently through the air. Nathan unfolded the old county map once again and compared it with the station layout. His eyes settled on the original baggage office at the far end of the building. The brass key seemed slightly larger than any ordinary door key, almost as though it belonged to something hidden rather than something visible. Victoria carefully removed it from the envelope. As they reached the old baggage room, both of them stopped at exactly the same moment. A heavy steel safe stood partially concealed behind collapsed shelving against the back wall. Its door was hanging slightly open. Fresh, muddy footprints crossed the dusty wooden floor, leading directly to the safe, and then disappearing through a side exit that had been closed only moments earlier. Nathan slowly knelt beside the footprints without touching them. The mud was still damp. Someone had been inside the station very recently. Victoria's heartbeat quickened as she looked toward the open safe. On its weathered steel door, written neatly through the thin layer of dust with a single fingertip, were 5 simple words that neither of them had expected to find. "You are finally on time." Neither Nathan nor Victoria moved for several seconds. The 5 words written across the dusty steel door seemed less like a message and more like a quiet acknowledgement that someone had anticipated their arrival down to the exact moment. Nathan slowly examined the muddy footprints again. They were clear enough to reveal the sole pattern of sturdy work boots, but the careful spacing suggested the person had walked calmly instead of rushing. Whoever had come before them had wanted to be seen without revealing who they were. Nathan gently pushed the heavy safe door completely open. Its old hinges released a low groan that echoed through the empty station before silence settled over the room once more. Inside rested a neatly organized collection of items untouched by moisture despite the passing decades. A weathered leather journal lay on top beside several carefully tied bundles of handwritten letters. Beneath them rested a polished wooden case containing a small digital recorder and a flash drive sealed inside a protective metal container. At the bottom of the safe was a thick leather portfolio embossed with the original Hayes Industries crest. Victoria carefully lifted it with both hands, surprised by its weight. She slowly opened the cover and stared at the yellowed pages inside. The title read Original Charter of Hayes Industries, signed by her grandfather more than 40 years earlier. She quietly shook her head. This disappeared before I was even born. Our attorneys searched for it for decades. Nathan looked toward the journal instead. He carefully opened the first page, where elegant handwriting immediately caught his attention. If you're reading these words together, then both of you have already passed the first test. One arrived carrying responsibility. The other arrived carrying character. Neither could complete this journey alone. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. She turned another page inside the portfolio and found handwritten amendments that had never appeared in the official corporate records. Entire sections described principles of fairness, community investment, employee dignity, and long-term stewardship instead of short-term profit. These were values she had often heard her grandfather speak about as a child, but had never seen formally documented. Nathan continued reading the journal. Every page described quiet acts of kindness the founder had witnessed throughout his life. Some involved strangers. Others involved employees whose names had long been forgotten. The entries were dated over many years, each ending with the same handwritten reminder. Character grows strongest where nobody is watching. Suddenly, Victoria noticed a small envelope tucked inside the journal. Her name was not written on it. Neither was Nathan's. Instead, the front simply read, "Open together." Nathan carefully unfolded the note. Inside was a single photograph showing a much younger William Hayes standing beside an old pickup truck on a snowy roadside. The face of the second man had been intentionally folded beneath another attached page, hiding his identity. Written below the picture were the words, "This was the day everything changed," although neither of us understood it yet. Before either of them could study the photograph further, Nathan noticed another object resting beneath the flash drive. It was a brass railroad lantern, identical to the sketch drawn in the corner of William's letter. He gently lifted it from the safe. As sunlight passed through the dusty glass, something metallic shifted inside the base. Nathan carefully twisted the bottom compartment open and discovered a folded piece of fresh white paper that clearly had not been there for decades. Unlike everything else inside the safe, the paper showed no signs of age. Victoria unfolded it immediately. The handwriting was modern, precise, and unmistakably different from her grandfather's. It contained only one sentence. "Everything you seek is still waiting, but only if you choose trust before certainty." Nathan quietly looked toward the still damp footprints leading out through the side door. Whoever had entered the station earlier had not come to steal the legacy. They had come to leave the next step behind. Victoria carefully placed the original charter back inside the leather portfolio, while Nathan continued turning the worn pages of William Hayes's journal with steady hands. Every entry felt less like the thoughts of a powerful businessman and more like the reflections of a man quietly searching for evidence that goodness still existed in ordinary people. The earliest pages described factory workers who stayed late to help one another without being asked. Later entries spoke about teachers, farmers, nurses, mechanics, and neighbors whose names history would never remember, but whose kindness had changed lives in ways no balance sheet could measure. Then Nathan stopped turning the pages. A folded bookmark rested between two entries dated nearly 15 years apart. He slowly opened to the first marked page and began reading aloud. "Today I met a young carpenter who repaired an elderly widow's porch after a spring storm. When she offered him all the money she had, he accepted only enough to cover the lumber because he said dignity should never become too expensive for honest people." Nathan looked puzzled. "I remember doing that," he whispered almost to himself. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. Nathan continued reading. The next marked entry came several years later. The same young father stopped beside a stranded family during the first snowfall of November. He fixed their truck, refused payment again, and arrived late to his own job because he believed frightened children should reach home before sunset. Nathan quietly lowered the journal. He remembered that day as well, although he had never imagined anyone had been watching from a distance. Victoria gently took the journal and continued reading through the remaining bookmarked pages. Each one described another simple act of kindness. None involved wealth, recognition, or public praise. There were no awards, no newspaper stories, and no cameras. William Hayes had simply observed a man living according to quiet principles year after year. The final bookmark page carried a date from only 8 months earlier. Victoria read slowly as emotion filled her voice. Nathan Brooks still does not know I've been following the story of his life. His daughter laughs easily despite hardship. His neighbors trust him without contracts. He repairs more than houses. He quietly repairs hope wherever he goes. If my family ever forgets why this company exists, let them find this man. His example will remind them before any lawyer or executive ever could. Silence settled across the abandoned station. Nathan stood near the broken window, looking out toward the rain-soaked mountains, unsure how to respond to words written by someone he had never knowingly met. He had never considered his daily choices remarkable. To him, they were simply the right things to do. Victoria closed the journal carefully, her understanding of her grandfather changing with every page. For years she had believed he admired vision, intelligence, and business success above all else. Instead, he had spent decades searching for something far more difficult to find. Character that remained unchanged when nobody was watching. As Nathan returned the journal to the safe, the small digital recorder inside the wooden case emitted a soft electronic tone. Neither of them had touched it. A tiny green light began blinking slowly across its surface before a calm recorded voice filled the quiet room. It was unmistakably William Hayes. If you have reached this recording together, then the second promise has been fulfilled. But before you hear the rest of my story, you must understand why someone else has been protecting this legacy since the day I hid it away. He is closer than you think, and by now he already knows that both of you have arrived. William Hayes's familiar voice continued through the small recorder with remarkable clarity, carrying the calm confidence of a man who had spent an entire lifetime preparing for this moment. If you are listening together, then you have already discovered what countless people never understood. A company is not protected by buildings, lawyers, or stock prices. It is protected by the character of those who choose what is right when no one is watching. Nathan and Victoria remained completely still as the recording played through the silent station. Many believed I spent my final years searching for a successor capable of protecting Hayes Industries. They were only partly correct. I was searching for someone who reminded my family why the company deserved to exist in the first place. Profit can build factories. Integrity builds legacies. The recording paused briefly before William spoke again. Inside the metal container, you will find a flash drive. It contains one final presentation prepared for the board of directors. They have never seen it. They must see it today before they make the vote that will permanently change everything we built. Victoria immediately opened the protective container and carefully removed the flash drive. Attached to it with a thin leather cord was a small handwritten tag that read, "Play only once the board is assembled." Nathan quietly looked toward the original charter resting inside the leather portfolio. "Whatever happens next was planned long before either of us walked into this station," he said softly. Victoria nodded, still absorbing the weight of her grandfather's words. She knew the board meeting was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours at company headquarters. That meeting would determine whether Hayes Industries abandoned several long-standing employee programs and community partnerships in favor of an aggressive restructuring plan designed to maximize quarterly profits. Until that morning, she had reluctantly prepared to support the proposal, believing there had been no alternative. Now the original charter resting beside her told an entirely different story. Before either of them could speak again, Victoria's phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. There was no caller identification, only a single text message from an unknown number. She slowly read the words aloud. Bring the original charter and the flash drive to the board meeting. Do not arrive separately. Trust the man beside you exactly as William instructed. Nathan exchanged a quiet glance with Victoria. The unknown sender clearly knew what they had found inside the station. A second message appeared only seconds later. The person who left the fresh note inside the lantern has protected this promise for many years. There will be time for introductions after the truth is revealed. Victoria looked around the abandoned station once more, almost expecting someone to step from the shadows. But the building remained peaceful except for rain dripping gently from the old roof. Nathan closed the journal with careful hands and returned every item to the wooden case except the portfolio and the flash drive. We should leave, he said calmly. Whatever your grandfather wanted the board to hear cannot wait any longer. As they stepped outside, the storm had finally passed. Sunlight broke through the retreating clouds, casting long golden beams across the abandoned railroad tracks, as though the forgotten station itself had been waiting many years to witness a new beginning. Nathan secured the portfolio safely inside the pickup, while Victoria carefully placed the flash drive in her pocket. Neither of them spoke during the first few miles back toward civilization. Both understood that the journey through the mountains had uncovered far more than hidden documents. It had uncovered a purpose that neither wealth nor hardship alone could have revealed. And somewhere ahead, inside a boardroom filled with powerful voices, a quiet truth was preparing to speak louder than all of them. The drive from the mountains to the city seemed shorter than either of them expected, yet every passing mile carried them closer to a truth that had been waiting for decades. By the time Nathan guided his weathered pickup into the underground parking garage beneath Hayes Industries headquarters, the morning sun had fully broken through the clouds. Employees hurried across polished marble floors carrying briefcases and coffee cups, never noticing the old truck that looked completely out of place among rows of luxury vehicles. Victoria stepped out first, holding the leather portfolio close against her side, while Nathan quietly followed with the wooden case containing the recorder and flash drive. As they entered the building, conversations softened. Several employees immediately recognized their chief executive officer, but many looked curiously toward the carpenter walking beside her in worn work boots and a faded flannel shirt. Nathan noticed the curious glances but remained completely at ease. He had spent his entire life entering places where he did not seem to belong. Appearance had never determined his worth. The elevator climbed steadily. Toward the executive floor, Victoria finally broke the silence. You still have not asked what this meeting is worth financially. Nathan looked toward the city skyline, stretching beyond the glass walls. Some things lose value the moment money becomes the first question. Victoria smiled quietly. Her grandfather would have appreciated that answer. The boardroom doors opened onto a long hallway lined with photographs documenting nearly 50 years of company history. Nathan paused briefly in front of one faded black and white picture showing William Hayes standing beside factory employees during the company's earliest years. Every face carried the same expression of quiet pride rather than corporate celebration. Nathan studied the photograph for only a moment before continuing toward the meeting room. Inside, 12 board members were already seated around a polished walnut table discussing financial forecasts and shareholder expectations. Their conversation stopped as Victoria entered beside a man none of them recognized. Several surprised expressions quickly turned into polite confusion. One director stood. Victoria, we were about to begin. She calmly placed the original charter onto the center of the table. The meeting will begin after everyone sees something my grandfather intended you to see. A few members exchanged uncertain glances while the company's general counsel carefully examined the weathered portfolio without opening it. Before anyone could object, the conference room door opened once more. An elderly gentleman with silver hair and a neatly pressed gray suit stepped inside, carrying only a slim leather briefcase. Victoria immediately recognized him. It was Samuel Whitmore, William Hayes's longtime personal attorney who had quietly retired several years earlier. Samuel smiled warmly at Nathan before addressing the room. "Good morning. I believe every person who was meant to be here has now arrived." Without waiting for permission, he walked to the head of the table and placed an official, notarized envelope beside the original charter. "For more than 20 years, I honored William Hayes's final legal instructions. This morning my responsibility ends." Nathan looked at Samuel with quiet curiosity. The attorney returned a knowing smile before speaking directly to him. "You do not remember meeting me, Mr. Brooks, but I have seen your work many times." Nathan frowned gently, searching his memory. Samuel continued. "The note inside the lantern, the message inside the station, and every step that guided you here came from me. William trusted me with one responsibility above every other: protect the legacy until the two people he believed in finally stood together." The room fell silent as Samuel slowly reached for the flash drive. Now it is time for William Hayes himself to explain why a humble carpenter was always meant to stand beside his granddaughter on the most important morning in the history of this company. Samuel inserted the flash drive into the conference room screen, and within seconds the image of William Hayes appeared seated in a simple wooden chair inside what looked like his favorite workshop rather than a corporate office. He wore an ordinary flannel shirt with rolled sleeves, and behind him rested unfinished pieces of handcrafted furniture instead of awards or framed financial reports. The room became completely still as his calm voice filled the boardroom. "If you're watching this recording, then I am no longer here to speak in person, which means every decision now belongs to those sitting in this room. Before you continue, I ask only one thing. Remember why Hayes Industries was created." The screen shifted to old photographs of the company's earliest days, showing factory workers, delivery drivers, welders, office assistants, and families gathered together during community celebrations. William continued. "This company was never built simply to manufacture products. It was built so honest people could build honest lives. The day profit becomes more valuable than people is the day we lose everything worth protecting." Several board members lowered their eyes toward the original charter resting on the conference table. William continued speaking with quiet conviction. "Some of you may wonder why Nathan Brooks is standing beside my granddaughter today. Years ago, my son became stranded during a severe snowstorm while traveling through these mountains. He was driving an old pickup because he had chosen to travel without company security for one weekend. The engine failed miles from the nearest town. A young carpenter stopped to help. He repaired the truck with tools he already carried, refused every offer of payment, and simply wished my son a safe journey home. Nathan Brooks never knew who he had helped. My son never forgot the man who reminded him that kindness does not ask for introductions." Nathan stood silently as forgotten memories slowly returned. He remembered fixing an unfamiliar truck on a freezing afternoon, accepting nothing except a grateful handshake before driving away. He had never learned the driver's name. William smiled gently through the screen. "When my son told me that story, I quietly began watching the life of the man who had helped him, not because I wished to reward him, but because I wished to understand whether such character remained consistent through ordinary years. It did. Every report I received confirmed the same truth. Nathan Brooks treated every person with equal dignity, whether they were wealthy, struggling, powerful, or unknown. That consistency became the greatest lesson my own family needed." The recording paused briefly before William looked directly into the camera. "Victoria, if you're seeing this, then I trust you have already discovered the original charter. It was never hidden because I feared thieves. It was hidden because principles have little value unless someone chooses them freely. Today you have that choice." He slowly placed his hand upon a copy of the charter beside him. "Every amendment inside this document is legally binding once presented alongside this recording and the notarized certification held by Samuel Whitmore. No restructuring plan may violate these founding commitments to employees, communities, and long-term stewardship." This was always the heart of Hayes Industries. Silence settled across the room after the recording ended. No one reached for financial reports or legal notes. No one interrupted the quiet. Finally, the chairman slowly closed the proposal that had been prepared for the restructuring vote and placed it aside without a word. Victoria looked toward Nathan, who had remained silent throughout the entire presentation. He simply looked around the room with the same calm expression he had carried into every ordinary day of his life before speaking only once. A legacy survives because people choose to honor it, not because paper tells them to. No one offered an argument, because in that moment, every voice in the boardroom understood that the founder had already spoken for them all. 1 year later, the same mountains welcomed another quiet morning, but this time sunlight poured gently across the pine trees instead of rain. Nathan Brooks stepped onto the porch of his log cabin, carrying a cup of fresh coffee, while Emma, now 9 years old, laughed nearby as she planted wildflowers beside the front walkway. Life looked remarkably familiar. The old pickup truck still rested beneath the tall pines. The wooden fence still needed another coat of paint. The workshop still echoed with the comforting sounds of saws, sandpaper, and patient craftsmanship. Nathan had accepted no executive position, no consulting contract, and no financial reward beyond the small reimbursement Samuel Whitmore insisted was necessary to cover the unexpected journey that had changed so many lives. Hayes Industries had offered him every opportunity imaginable, but he had politely declined each one. He believed the work of building homes and helping neighbors remained exactly where he belonged. Yet even without changing his address, his quiet example had traveled farther than he ever imagined. Across the country, Hayes Industries had restored every community program William Hayes originally established. Apprenticeship opportunities expanded into rural towns that had long been overlooked. Employee assistance programs returned stronger than before. The company began measuring success not only by quarterly earnings, but also by the lives strengthened through honest work and responsible leadership. Victoria Hayes often reminded her executive team that every major decision should pass one simple question before receiving approval. Would this choice make William Hayes proud? And would Nathan Brooks recognize it as fair? That question quietly reshaped countless conversations inside boardrooms where numbers had once spoken louder than people. Just before noon, the familiar sound of tires rolling across the gravel driveway reached Nathan's ears. He smiled before turning toward the road. Victoria stepped from a modest sport utility vehicle without an assistant, without security, and without the formal appearance that had once surrounded every public event in her life. She carried a small wooden box wrapped carefully in soft cloth. Emma ran forward with an excited smile, greeting Victoria like an old family friend rather than one of the country's most recognizable business leaders. Victoria laughed warmly and handed Emma a paper bag filled with flower seeds collected from William Hayes's favorite garden. Nathan welcomed her inside, where the smell of freshly baked bread filled the cabin. After lunch, they sat together on the porch overlooking the mountains that had quietly witnessed the beginning of their unlikely journey. Victoria gently placed the wooden box into Nathan's hands. "Samuel asked me to wait exactly 1 year before giving this to you," she said softly. Nathan opened the lid and discovered William Hayes's old pocket watch resting on deep blue velvet. Beneath it lay one final handwritten letter. He unfolded it carefully. "Nathan, if this reaches you, then my family has remembered what matters most. I cannot repay kindness, because true kindness is never offered as a transaction. I can only thank you for living in a way that reminded us who we were always meant to become. Please keep this watch, not because time belongs to us, but because every ordinary day gives us another opportunity to choose dignity over pride, service over recognition, and grace over applause." Nathan quietly closed the letter as the afternoon breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley. Emma looked toward him with curious eyes. "Dad, after everything that happened, what was the real treasure Grandpa William wanted everyone to find?" Nathan smiled gently while slipping the old watch into his shirt pocket. He looked across the peaceful mountains before answering in the calm voice that had guided his life for so many years. It was never hidden inside a safe, a charter, or a company. The real treasure was hidden inside the choices people make every single day when nobody is watching. Victoria looked toward the distant horizon without saying another word. Sometimes the greatest legacy was not measured in billions of dollars. Sometimes it quietly lived inside an ordinary man whose dignity never changed. And because it never changed, it gave countless others the courage to change their own lives.